Well, I got to tell you something. I was not expecting yesterday's news, as I know most of the Philly faithful were not expecting. Maybe the brain trust of the hockey organization knew something was brewing for a while, but a lot of fans really kind of taken aback yesterday with the news of Cutter Gauthier. And, we wanted to get Frank Seravalli on here right away. Nobody gets the inside details like he does, really from start to finish. So, Frank, let's just start right off the top. We don't need to mess around because this is a wild situation. So welcome in. Good to have you back on the show. Our first guest who's come on twice, so we appreciate that. You take the crown as our first ever guest and our first repeat guest. So Frank, how you doing this morning?
I'm good. Yeah. Yesterday was one of those trades that I was actually getting set to tape a podcast with Sam Reinhart. And I looked down and I'm like, wait, what? And I actually had to it was one of those moments where I had to check on Twitter that it was actually the Flyers account that had sent it. And it's not so much that a Cutter Gauthier trade had materialized because I had, sort of heard some rumblings behind the scenes of this guy's unhappy and it all started back at development camp. But I didn't think that it had gotten to the point where the Flyers needed to pull the trigger. And that is the part that really kind of surprised me is the timing of it and also the return. Cutter Gauthier, depends on where you rank him. Somewhere in the top 5 of all NHL prospects goes to the Anahiem Ducks in exchange for Jamie Drysdale and a second round pick. And look, I understand why the Flyers made this move. I think the bigger question I have is why now? And Danny Briere, their GM, had mentioned last night that they felt that they needed to capitalize on the great World Junior that Gauthier had heading into that gold medal game. He had more assists than anyone else in the tournament, had points, and he was, for me, probably the MVP of the tournament. Now he's outside the Flyers organization, and I think he significantly sets back their timeline to contend and compete again.
Well, also, Frank, to that point, you get Jamie Drysdale now, who's coming back from injury. The Flyers are in that first wild card spot in the Eastern Conference. They're trying to build toward the playoffs, right? So I think had the Flyers waited a little bit longer toward the trade deadline, maybe Drysdale or whoever they bring in doesn't get accustomed to the team as quickly. So for the Flyers, this is probably the best time. And like Briere said, and like you just mentioned, Gauthier's value is never going to be any higher than it is right now.
I
So
disagree.
you do?
I would say that this is a guy that I believe Cutter Gauthier is going to be a dominant force in the NHL. And with all due respect to Jamie Drysdale, even just confirming some thoughts that I had, I reached out to some people who had seen him play pretty closely in Anaheim. What's the ceiling for Jamie Drysdale? A 2-3 defenseman in the NHL. And not to say that's anything to sneeze at, a right shot guy who can quarterback a power play, had 32 points a couple years ago, has dealt with a couple injuries. I get it from the Ducks perspective. The sell to the Flyers is, hey, you get the number 6 overall pick from just 2 years earlier than Cutter Gauthier went at number 5, and we'll give you a second. And
Mhm.
this is a guy that's a proven NHL talent. I think what we're dealing with here is a huge disparity between ceilings of players that, unfortunately for the Flyers, if someone doesn't want to be with you and doesn't want to sign, which they made clear was the case yesterday, you don't really have much choice. But what you could do is hold out a bit longer to make sure that you get a better deal. And that's really what the Flyers were dealing with this, over the last number of weeks. I'm told that they had engaged somewhere between 18 and 20 different NHL teams to try and, field the best deal that they could. And Jamie Drysdale was the guy that they got really excited about. Clearly, the Flyers see Jamie Drysdale as someone that's having a much higher ceiling than myself or potentially a lot of other people that watch the league closely.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, Frank. And I've seen Drysdale play probably more than most on the East Coast because I was living in the Central Time Zone. A good friend of mine was on the Anahiem Ducks with him his rookie year, so I watched that team quite a bit. And I thought he had a really promising rookie year. Then he misses almost an entire season with a shoulder injury. This year, he's dealt with a lower body situation, so I think he's kind of been a little bit hot and cold, trying to kind of get his footing as an everyday regular NHLer. But
A
I'm just
plus,
curious.
by the way, A plus kid.
Yeah.
Everyone that I talk to cannot say enough about Jamie Drysdale and his personality, what he's like as a person, a teammate, a leader. That's all great stuff. That injury that he dealt with last year was really tough. And I think the fact that he had made it all the way back, I think he wanted to get going sooner last season than he ultimately did for the Ducks, only playing 8 games. And now moving forward, he's got a real opportunity with the Flyers to make a dent.
Yeah. Frank, let me ask you this, pointed. Why didn't Cutter Gauthier want to be a Flyer? What is it about playing in a prime hockey market on the East Coast, okay, in prime time slots? He plays in Boston right now, so he lives out on the East Coast right now. I know he's an Arizona kid, but what was it about the Flyers that was such a turnoff? Because look, you and I grew up here in Philadelphia. I don't think either of us are Philadelphia Flyers fans at this point of our life, like we probably were when we were little kids. But we understand the tradition of playing here in Philadelphia. We understand the passion of the fan base, how loud the Wells Fargo Center is in the playoffs, how the city gets behind you when you're good. What was it?
That's the biggest mystery here. And I think that's the thing that the Flyers were kind of left shaking their head at. You know, they had spent a lot of time over the last, it's more than 6 months, 7, 8 months, trying to get this back on the rails, trying to talk to Cutter Gauthier to say, what is it that's bothering you here? Let's see if we can fix this. Let's see if we can all get on the same page. There's been so much speculation in the last, 18 hours that this is something connected to the coach and John Tortorella. He says, I don't know Cutter Gauthier from a hole in the wall. There was a clip going around yesterday where Cutter Gauthier had explained on social media the first time he met John Tortorella. He seemed to be pretty excited then. I don't know what fell apart here. There seemed to be some suggestion behind the scenes. I know certainly in agent circles on Monday night that, does this go back to last season? Did Cutter Gauthier want to turn pro and the Flyers weren't interested in having that happen at that time to burn the first year of his contract? I can't imagine it's a detail that small. Whatever it is, the Flyers seem to be mystified. And me personally, I am too, to see a player of that magnitude spurn a franchise that many see as part of the quote original seven. I mean, this is a team that's steeped in history, has had tons of success, has been to numerous Stanley Cup finals, even though they haven't won in 50 years. And they're looking at a player walk away that I think they're shocked by. And I think, frankly, many people around the league are shocked by. This is an organization that treats its players like gold. Everything that you could possibly want or imagine is provided for you. Facilities are great. Top 3 sports city in the US. I mean, whatever it is that you want to, check the box to, the Flyers seem to have it. And I'm really surprised that, this is how it ended up playing out, that he says, you know what, not only am I not going to sign with you, I'm not even going to talk to you. The Flyers sent GM Danny Briere and president of Hockey Ops Keith Jones to Sweden over the World Junior Tournament to just again take one last stab at trying to fix this relationship, to say, hey, what's going on here? Can we put this back on the rails and bring you into the fold? We see you as such a valuable piece to what we want to do. And they couldn't even get a meeting with him in Sweden to spend any time with him to talk through it. And so coming back from that after a near MVP performance, they felt like, hey, time is right before word gets out to make this move.
Frank, is that why this has become such a big deal, just because of the way Cutter Gauthier handled it? Because we've seen this happen before in NHL history. Eric Lindros did it back in the day, and Adam Fox most recently in history told Carolina he didn't want to play there.
Carolina and Calgary.
Yeah, and Calgary. So what is it about this Cutter Gauthier situation that has blown it up incredibly? Because, I remember thinking back to when Fox did it. Obviously, he's a 3rd round pick, not a 5th overall pick. But is it because Cutter Gauthier, for the Gen Z folks out there, kind of ghosted the Flyers? Is that why it's such a big deal?
No, I think it's a big deal because with the Fox situation, he wasn't nearly this big of a prospect. As you mentioned, 3rd round pick. He grew into being, a top player and a Norris Trophy winner eventually. But Cutter Gauthier has long sort of been looked at as a really quality, talented piece. So that's one part of it. Two is, when you get drafted, in the spot that Fox did, I think a lot of people understand the idea of saying, hey, you know what? I don't want to go play in Canada. And so that part of it is the first part. And so then he gets sent to Carolina. And then after he sort of steers his way out of Calgary to Carolina, he's knocking on the door at that point through his Harvard career of saying, I'm not really that far away from unrestricted free agency. My dad was a Rangers season ticket holder. I'm a huge Ranger fan. I want to go play for the New York Rangers. And so I think a lot of people understood that. In this case with Cutter Gauthier, I don't like, a lot of people aren't really connecting the dots here between how you get from telling the team on draft day, I was built to be a Flyer, to then, less than a year later at the draft is when Danny Briere said teams first started to call and say that they heard that there might be issues and they're interested, that he says, not only do I not want to play there, I don't even want to talk to you. And that's the part that I think has really surprised everyone.
Well, Frank, Colby, sorry, I don't mean to jump in quick, but who's to say that Cutter Gauthier doesn't now force his way to Pittsburgh at some point? Adam Fox grew up a Ranger fan. Cutter Gauthier has been very vocal about growing up a Crosby and Penguins fan. Who knows if he tells Anaheim, hey, I don't want to come here either. I mean, depending on how the rest of their season goes.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. The Flyers, and look, the Anahiem Ducks aren't giving up a player, first off, like Jamie Drysdale and a second-round pick for a player that they haven't gotten confirmation from the agent or advisor, excuse me, that he wouldn't sign. So the Flyers, the reason why that number was 18 to 20 teams that they had engaged with and not 31 is because there were 13 or 10 other teams that they knew that Gauthier wouldn't be signing with them. So he had kind of made his intentions clear behind the scenes. And so basically what they were dealing with was the 18 or 20 teams that were sort of on the list that he would be willing to sign with. And that's where the Ducks stepped up.
That just is even more interesting to hear, Frank, that this guy had a list. And Jonny, just to kind of lean in a little bit on some of that, here's what I can tell you, having friends in Philadelphia. We just moved back to, the suburban area of Villanova, which is outside of the city. Obviously, I was living in Chicago the last couple of seasons working for them. But, people that don't know a lot about hockey, or maybe even follow the team super closely here in Philadelphia, they knew the name Cutter Gauthier, okay? Just like they know about Mitch Koff. There were two prospects in this city that were exciting people about the future of the franchise. And, I have to fall on a sword a little bit, because this summer when Cutter Gauthier decided he wasn't going to come to development camp in Philadelphia, I actually stuck up for the kid. And I said, look, he played in the World Championships. He played a lot of hockey. As a college player, you have to pay for development camp. You don't get to go for free multiple times in your career. So I said, you know what? I don't think it's that crazy to people on Twitter and to fans that he didn't come to development camp. And I was wrong about that. I completely misread the situation. I didn't know about all the behind the scenes that apparently wasn't that big of a secret. Apparently, as Frank has talked about, this is something that had been being discussed for a while, since the Worlds of last year and maybe even beforehand. So, hearing you, Frank, talk about the fact that this guy already had a list, listen, it's brazen. It almost seems like something you'd see in the NBA, not really the NHL, where a guy who's never stepped foot in the league, albeit looks like he's going to be a big time player, is calling the shots so far. And,
just a full stop. I actually like that, by the way.
Yeah.
Like, players have control. They have a voice. If you don't want to play, like, use your voice, get to where you want to get to. That's the deal. You're put in a lottery situation where the fate of your career is in the hands of someone here. And you say, you know what? I don't want to go to the place where I've been drafted. I don't have to do that. Who says I have to? And when you're a college player, especially, you've got a 4-year clock. The Flyers had until 2026, essentially, in order to wait this out.
Right.
August 15th, 2026. I have no issue with players using their voice to get to where they want. I think that's the way life should be. I think the surprise here is, one, the team and organization that he did it to, two, how this all played out, and three, how quiet it was kept. Like
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'm kind of ashamed of myself as an insider, having, sort of known or had some belief behind the scenes that something wasn't quite right, that after development camp, which was July, I just scrolled through my messages right now. I was asking questions on July 5th when he didn't show up. And the answers that I got were really kind of like toned down. It was like, hey, he had been through a lot of hockey, a lot of stuff going on. We're hoping to get some answers on why he isn't here. And I didn't really take it further, mostly because I was like, this kid's probably going to change his mind. Like, this will all work itself out. Who spurns the Flyers of all teams? It's not the Coyotes. It's not like, pick another team around the
Yeah.
league that is in a different situation. It's not, it's not the Winnipeg Jets where you don't want to play in Canada, whatever it might be. I was shocked by that. And,
But I think, Frank, I think that shows you that this organization took a major hit when Ed Snyder passed away and leadership changed in the organization, because I think what
I
Dan
think that's
Hilferty,
bullshit.
well, that's fine. You can think that's bullshit, but I think
The
what
franchise totally was off the rails. But
off the exactly, and that happened when Ed
but
Snyder passed
that's
away and they
why
had new leadership.
this
So
is a
how's that
totally
bullshit?
different leadership group. Look at their
I
CEO
understand
and
that,
Dan
but I'm saying
Hilferty
now
and
their
Danny Briere,
reputation
and
has had the damage over the last couple of years, and they've completely
that
lost
can't
their
be it.
way. There's rumors about Tortorella's actually running things, which I don't think that to be completely true. I think he has a say, but I'm just saying, under Dave Scott, and I'm drawing a blank on
Chuck
what
Fletcher,
her name was,
oh,
Chuck Fletcher,
Valerie
what I forget,
Camillo.
Valerie Camillo. I think this organization lost its identity and lost what it means to be a Flyer, what it means to be a part of this city. And I think Hilferty, Jones, and Briere have quickly restored that feeling here in the city. And I think that a lot of that has to do with how they lost their way, because I don't think this would have happened, okay, if this transition went from Ed Snyder to Keith Jones, Danny Briere, and Dan Hilferty the way it's being run now. So I don't agree with you that you think it's bullshit. And I think that it 100% has to do it.
It did. No, I'm not disagreeing with your premise that the Flyers lost their way. What I'm saying is, there's been plenty of runway since a new regime took over, and if you're not going to give them a chance, and you're not going to at least find out what it's like by actually showing up to development camp, then shame on you. You've written off an entire organization that's completely different than the one that you were drafted by in 2022. And so I award you no points if that's your explanation, Cutter Gauthier. And as a proud Philadelphian, many would say, may God have mercy on your soul.
Yeah,
Well,
well,
can I make a quick
Frank,
point here?
well, hold on. I need to finish my
All
thought here,
right,
Johnny.
all
And,
right.
and this is the last thing I'll say, Frank, about on this topic is I agree with the fact that you're right. You have a rule in the CBA for drafted players, and he exercised, his leverage leading into that rule as a college player. I also have no problem with that. This is how the rules are. Guys do it. It doesn't happen to Philadelphia, but whatever, guys do it. What I have an issue with, and what my main issue with, is when I'm talking to people that work in the organization, in player development, and they're telling me that John LeClair went there this year to watch him play and just talk to him after his game, which is completely normal for a draft pick, okay? John LeClair works in player development. Patrick Sharp works in player development. These are former star players, guys who deserve the respect of any hockey player, or Danny Briere for that matter, okay? And for you to not, you send your college coach out of the locker room to tell those guys he's not coming out here to talk to you. That's freaking John LeClair. That's Patrick Sharp. You give those guys the time of day at any time of your career in your life. That's totally disrespectful. And that is my main issue, is the disrespect towards those individuals, Danny Briere included, flying to Sweden just to talk to you. That is incredibly disrespectful. Pull up your big boy pants, face the music, and tell them face to face. I just, that's my main issue.
I'll take it one step further. Once this trade went down on Monday night, you have to say something. You have to issue a statement on social media, address all of this somehow, explain to people how you got from point A to point Z. And that's really kind of what we're missing here is there's this whole thing is shrouded in mystery as to why he doesn't want to play there. And that's, again, that's his choice. But the way that we got here is the part that's way off the rails.
Well, the point that I wanted to make too, and granted, it's not apples to apples. Colby's already laughing. He probably thinks it's a dumb take, but think about the college culture right now. The transfer portal has completely changed. A lot of college players commit to a school, they get a full ride, and then decide they don't want to go. They decommit, and that's become very common in the college hockey world. It's not really frowned upon anymore, where it used to be maybe 10 years ago. So the culture in hockey, when you are loyal to a certain school, to a certain NHL team, that has shifted. And maybe,
Jonny,
Cutter
you were
Gauthier,
a transfer.
yeah, but not by choice, I guess. I was kind of forced out a little bit, but you know what I mean? But I had to sit out for
He
a full
his
year.
power play time, Frank, so he got out of there.
But I had to sit out for a full year.
You got Kuzmenko'd. It's all right.
There was a punishment to it, though. I didn't just get to transfer and play right away. Like, I knew the sacrifice I was making. But now college players decide they don't like their playing time. They can decide at the end of the school year they want to go to a different school. And then 2 months later, they're playing for a different program. Some guys have done it BU to BC. Like, it's just completely changed.
Listen, Isaac Howard, one of the kids who starred for Team USA at the World Junior, didn't like his ice time, thought that Scott Sandelin was too hard-nosed of a coach. Okay, at University of Minnesota Duluth, a guy I love, Scott Sandelin, by the way. I would have loved to play for that guy. And he went to Michigan State, and like the kid's, he's a great player. But to your point, Jonny, like this is how guys are doing it now.
Nobody says a word. It's become common. So, now we're seeing it at the NHL level, and Cutter Gauthier is not the first. He's certainly not going to be the last. And Frank, to your point, players should have a voice. I mean, we've seen guys like Taylor Hall, a former MVP in the NHL, voice that he wants out of a certain situation and pick where he wants to go. I mean, it's becoming way more common just in the world of hockey for players to speak up and talk about.
And by the way, that's what makes it spicy. Like I love, like, why do people watch and pay attention to the NBA? Because people say stuff. People, they make their intentions clear. Like, I don't want to play here anymore. I'm out. And once the player does that, the team moves on. And that's okay. That's the way life works. There's breakups, shakeups in all walks of life. People change jobs, change marriages, whatever that might be. All good. I think hockey needs more of it. This is like, look at what we spent the first 24 minutes of today's show talking about so far. I'm all for it. I think just provide some communication, some clarity, something so that we're all not just left here grasping at straws of, okay, fine, you want it out, but why? And if the explanation is because I just didn't want to play there because of where it's located or whatever, okay, I guess people could maybe wrap their brains around that. But the way it all played out, I think, is the part that's surprising.
Yeah, well,
and
we always see James Harden tell us why he's nuking a basketball team roster before he leaves it. I mean, it's true. To your point, at least he will say, oh, so Daryl Morey's a liar, so I'm not playing for this guy anymore. Like,
whatever you want to make up in your head,
he gives a reason.
I'm good with it. We don't have to agree with the reason. Just tell us what the reason is.
And I think the fact that Gauthier did speak up instead of just like keeping his mouth shut and going to Philly and, let's say, sulking for a year, his rookie year, like, kudos to him. Like, if he doesn't want to be there and he's not going to perform well there, and his headspace isn't going to be 100% in Philadelphia, like, Flyers fans wouldn't want a player like that either. So I think,
I think the other thing that I'm kind of left with is it would have been fun to watch the Flyers get a little bit medieval here, like they did in their response. But the fact that they had until 2026 to kind of milk this out and to really squeeze out potentially the best deal possible. I'm not saying that they didn't get it. Maybe this is all that was offered and put on the table. But let's go back to what I first said to start the show. Cutter Gauthier, I truly believe, going to be a dominant force in the NHL. I
think everybody's with you on that.
Yeah. And so when that's the case and it sort of all happens quietly behind the scenes and there's not this sort of larger auction that takes place, at least from a public perspective, maybe that part hurts. It's
Yeah.
nice to do it under the cloak of darkness and quiet because there's way less drama, and then all you do is sort of present the finished product. But what would have happened had you waited until June? What would have happened had you waited until, I don't know, this
Yeah.
time next year? And
Well,
you force him to go back to college hockey again,
yeah, which there's no way he was going to
Yeah,
do. He was
no
never
chance.
going back for another year, which is why I agree with you. I think they could have had more leverage as this thing went along. Now, so I
So
was
what would
home
have been
last.
his path? Like, let's spitball this. Like, let's say the Flyers say, we're not trading you. We're not trading your rights. Okay, so he doesn't go back to college next year. Where does he go play?
He would have, I mean, honestly, he would
Yeah,
have to go play somewhere in Europe. He would
yeah.
have to go play, sign a contract to go play for the KHL or something like that, which he's not going to do. And he's not going to go back to college for a third year.
What do you,
I
I
agree
don't
with you.
even know CBA wise if he'd be able to do that. They'd have to loan his rights, wouldn't they?
Why would they have to, though? He's not under contract there.
Yeah, it's good. I don't
Mhm.
know that we've ever seen anything play out quite like this, where team
Yeah.
and player both have leverage.
Well,
Yeah.
and the other thing too, Frank, with this situation is the Flyers went on a media tour last night, because I had the TV on in my house and I had the local Philadelphia feed. Keith Jones went in the booth during intermission. Danny Briere held a press conference in intermission. And then Dan Hilferty, who's the CEO and sort of de facto owner because Comcast owns the team and he represents Comcast, he went on the radio and the podcast world and everything like that. And they got out in front of it. They said, if you don't want to be a Flyer, we do not want you here. They were very clear about that. Now, one thing that's been getting brought up and something that I want to address with you guys is the fact that Kevin Hayes orchestrated this whole thing. Now, I reached right out to Kevin Hayes, and he couldn't have denied this any stronger. And, I think that it was very irresponsible.
It's disappointing to see someone that doesn't even play there anymore looped into this.
Yeah.
And now people are attacking him on social media, making threats against him and his family, saying incredibly off-colored things about the death of his brother. I mean, like, come on, people, have a little bit of class with that kind of thing. Don't be a keyboard warrior, and don't believe everything you hear on every podcast or from every blogger. Okay, like, completely irresponsible. Players talk, sure. Players share experiences, sure. But this is the NHL here. Okay, we're not talking about pee-wee hockey, for Timmy and Jimmy here. So, let's just put those rumors to bed right now and just say Kevin Hayes had zero to do with this situation.
Yeah, that was one that a dot that I didn't really understand was being connected.
Well, Cutter Gauthier has been vocal about his relationship with Kevin Hayes, so I think that's where people kind of just put the dots together.
Oh, so they both went to BC? Like, I mean, come on. I mean, Cam Atkinson went to BC. He's been benched by Torts multiple times, but only speaks
He's
highly
been a
of
healthy
him.
scratch as recently as last
Exactly.
week.
I mean,
Well,
every
there
player
was
has a
a-
different experience.
There was a podcast clip going around. It was actually my friend's podcast, The Empty Netter Show, when they had Cutter on. And Cutter spoke for like a minute and 15 seconds about his relationship with Kevin Hayes. So that clip was like circling around last night and people were commenting on it. But that was also from like 2 years ago.
Yeah,
Hey,
but he,
I love the other part. You mentioned the three-prong approach by the Flyers front office to then come out and make the message clear. If you don't, John Tortorella addressed it after the game too. If you don't want to be a Flyer,
Yeah.
you're not going to be. I love the quote, but I also love the spiciness of all of this. Like, people are offended because the Flyers are a proud team and organization. Yeah, they lost their way the last few years, of course. But as I mentioned, this is a team that, for the most part, I can't, in my entire career covering this team and then also growing up here, I can't remember anyone spurning this team, and that's fine. I just talked about the NBA and why it's so spicy with the transactions we see. Why is it a some of the best reality shows that you see on TV? We've got one brewing here now. Whenever Cutter Gauthier makes his NHL debut in Philly, like, you should legitimately pack an extra helmet for the walk from the bus into the arena. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying that like to be a smart ass or for funny. Like, people here are legitimately angry. And guess what?
Yeah.
That's going to be fun. No one
Well,
should
Frank,
take it to an offside level, but like, as Dan Hilferty said, like, if this is the path you choose, you deserve to be, ridiculed. And if this happens, by the way, with a million things that happen, John Tavares and his situation where he left Long Island to go to Toronto. He's booed every time he touches the puck when he comes back.
Well, he totally lied to them. He lied to them.
Well, Frank, I just want to add some context to your comment when you said he should wear a helmet. I think what you're referring to is former MLB player JD Drew, who said
I was a kid. You and I were kids
exactly.
when the JD Drew thing happened at the vet. He came, it is kind of a similar situation.
Yeah,
drafted incredibly high with the Phillies, demanded a payment that the Phillies weren't willing to make. In fact, no team was. And he comes back eventually with the St. Louis Cardinals after being redrafted. And in the outfield, in his debut, fans threw not AA batteries, as someone mentioned online. They threw D-sized batteries at JD Drew in the outfield, which
normal behavior for Philly fans, huh?
Well, frankly,
me personally, that was like that's how I grew up. Like that was it. Like this is how you did it. This is how you handled it.
What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you need to be hitting the subscribe button right here at Daily Faceoff. Exclusive interviews and analysis from our hockey insider Frank Seravalli, fantasy updates from Brock Sagan, and a daily live show at noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss any of the fantastic content, so hit that subscribe button.